Torah, v'simcha, v'sason v'ikar. LaYehudim Torah, v'simcha, v'sason v'ikar.
If you'd like, we're on page 457. I don't want this to... הנה על ישועתי אבטח ולא אבחד, כי הוזיב את זמרת אדוני ויהי לי לישועה. ובשבתם מים בששון ממעייני הישועה. לאדוני הישועה למך ברכתך סלה. אדוני צבאות עמנו משכב לנו, אלוהי יעקב סלה. אדוני צבאות אשרי אדם בוטח בך. אדוני הושיע המלך יעננו ויום קוראנו. ליהודים הייתה אורה ושמחה וששון ויקר, כן תהיה לנו כוס ישועות אשא, ובשם אדוני אקרא.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen borei peri hagafen Yisrael Amin Ben Yom HaShvi V'Sheshet Yemei HaMaaseh Baruch Atah Adonai HaMavdil Ben Kodesh Lechol
Ben Kodesh, Ben קודש לכל חטאותינו,
זרענו
וחסדנו,
ירבך החול,
והכוכבים בלילה. שבוע טוב, 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 שבוע טוב. A good week, a week of peace, may gladness reign and joy increase. A good week, a week of peace, may gladness reign and joy increase. Shavua Tov, Shana Tova. See if you can find someone nearby that you don't yet know. Someone behind you, in front of you. Introduce yourselves. Shavua Tov, everyone. This night of Selichot is always very moving, every year. The congregational reunion, the exquisite music, which escorts us into the season of the High Holy Days, the ceremonial changing of the Torah mantles to white. This night of contemplation is intensified this year by our constant prayers for Israel, for the soldiers on the front lines, for those who are taking shelter in safe rooms and stairwells, for the tens of thousands of evacuees, for the wounded, the grieving, for 101 hostages held in captivity. May God watch over and protect them all. And because we can be expansive in our prayers, because we need not confine the limit of our concern, we can also pray for any innocent victims of this brutal war, this expanding war. This very special night is further enriched by dedicating our learning to the memory of Rabbi Mark Dov Shapiro. Rabbi Shapiro served Holy Blossom Temple from 1977 to 1982. While the majority of his rabbinate was in Springfield, Massachusetts, Mark and his wife Marcia, both native Torontonians, always maintained close ties here. Known for his devotion to interfaith relations and social justice, pastoral care, and lifelong learning, Rabbi Shapiro also strengthened the North American Reform movement by serving on many committees and writing publications for the Central Conference of American Rabbis and for the Union of Reform Judaism. Most of all, Rabbi Shapiro is forever cherished for his constant warmth and kindness. Joining us through the live stream are many Reform rabbis, family and friends of Rabbi Shapiro, congregants, and dear colleagues. Among them is Rabbi Simcha Bab of Chicago, who now will join us to share a few words in honor of his longtime friend. Rabbi.
We are grateful to Holy Blossom Temple for establishing and maintaining this lecture in memory of Rabbi Mark Dov Shapiro. The lecture provides his friends and family with an annual opportunity to gather together to honor Mark. I first met Mark in Jerusalem in 1972 as we began our studies at the Hebrew Union College. We remained friends ever since. Rabbi Mark Dov Shapiro was the smartest member of our class. We all knew he was the best student. Despite his accomplishments, he remained humble. Despite the obstacles he faced over the years, he remained positive and optimistic. And when you were talking to Mark, you knew he was really listening. He was not focused on what he would say next. He was paying attention to what you were saying to him. He had a caring heart as a rabbi, as a friend, as a husband, as a father, and as a member of his extended family. Mark was also so creative in serious and in silly ways. He had a sparkle in his eye. We loved Mark. He was a friend, but I thought of him as a brother. He would have said he was an only child, but it's not true. He had lots and lots of brothers. In Pirkei Avot we read, there are 3 crowns: the crown of Torah, the crown of priesthood, and the crown of kingship. But the crown of a good name excels them. Our friend Rabbi Mark Dov Shapiro earned a crown of a good name among his congregants, among his friends, and in his family. May his memory continue to be a blessing. Amen.
Amen. Amen. And thank you, Rabbi Bob, for honoring Mark in this way. His memory should forever be a blessing for you, for Mark's family who is joining us through the live stream, and for all who were enriched by his leadership and by his friendship. The Rabbi Mark Dov Shapiro Memorial Lecture was lovingly established by a circle of Rabbi Shapiro's friends and family, congregants, and colleagues. Since his death in 2020, our teachers have been leading scholars of Reform Judaism, namely David Ellenson of blessed memory and Michael Marmer, Larry Hoffman, and Devorah Weisberg. This year, we are expanding the circle of leading scholars beyond the Reform movement to include Shai Held, President and Dean of the Hadar Institute. With centers in New York City and Jerusalem, the Hadar Institute is a yeshiva and think tank dedicated to creating Jewish life that is rooted in rigorous and nuanced Torah study, gender equality, meaningful Jewish practice, and the values of kindness and compassion. Since its founding in 2006, Hadar has impacted thousands, giving Jews of all ages the tools they need to access traditional texts and live inspired Jewish lives. Among the hundreds of rabbis who enjoyed the advanced learning that Hadar offers was none other than Rabbi Mark Dov Shapiro. In his retirement, Rabbi Shapiro traveled to New York to learn from Rabbi Held and from the impressive Hadar faculty, and so it is very fitting that Shai is our teacher tonight. I was lucky enough to learn with Rabbi Held in Jerusalem this past February. He pulled together a remarkable group of North American rabbis from across the spectrum of Jewish life. While the war raged then in Gaza, Rabbi Held, Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, and other leading thinkers sheltered us in their world of sacred ideas and sacred texts. Against the backdrop of so much hatred being lobbed against the Jewish people then, Shai taught about love. It was then that I knew I wanted to bring Rabbi Held back to Holy Blossom Temple so that you too could be challenged and uplifted by his latest teachings. Shai Held is a philosopher, theologian, and Bible scholar. He has received the prestigious Covenant Award for Excellence in Jewish Education and has been named multiple times by Newsweek as one of the 50 most influential rabbis in America and by the Jewish Daily Forward as one of the 50 most prominent Jews of the world. Rabbi Held is the author of Abraham Joshua Heschel, The Call of Transcendence, as well as an extraordinary series on Parashat HaShavua entitled The Heart of Torah. His most recently published book, just out this year, is receiving great acclaim from Jewish and Christian scholars alike. It is entitled Judaism is About Love, Recovering the Heart of Jewish Life. He'll be teaching from the second chapter tonight, I believe. Shai is also the host of Hadar's newest podcast, cleverly called Answers Withheld. Yes. Please join me in welcoming Rabbi Shai Held.
You can just get down. That's right. Thank you. Shavua Tov, everyone. Thank you, Rabbi Splansky, for your warm welcome. It is nice to be back here. I think I did have the privilege of teaching here, I don't know what it was, 6-7 years ago in the pre-COVID era. And I want to just take a minute to say that it is an especial honor to be able to teach in Rabbi Shapiro's memory, who was, I would find it ridiculous to say he was my student, but someone I had the opportunity to have in my classroom, and it's a great privilege to be able to participate in honoring his memory. Benny, I got to get you turned on. Okay, are we good now? Perfect. Okay, great. So tonight's session is entitled, The Gifts of God Flow Through You. That provocative phrase, I hope I will be able to explain as we go. What I really want to do is explore the three of the core pillars of Jewish theology and spirituality: grace, gratitude, and generosity. And specifically, I want to focus on the idea that Jewish spirituality begins with a sense of grace. That is not a Christian word. We'll talk about that in a minute. Or not exclusively a Christian word. And that where a sense of grace leads us is to a nexus. I'll explain what I mean by a nexus in this context in a minute, of gratitude and generosity. What I'm trying to articulate here is a kind of vision of what a Jewish way of experiencing the world might look like. And I'll begin with the following kind of very simple, not earth-shattering observation, which is that foundational to a Jewish view of the world is the realization that we did not create ourselves. We did not create ourselves. Something that the book of Psalms says, something that Augustine says in his Confessions, for those of you, for my honored Christian guests here tonight, right? Psalm 100, which is the first text that you have, Psalm 100 verse 3 is one of the most difficult verses in Tanakh to understand because there's so many different versions of it, of what the original Hebrew might have been. But one of the traditional readings of it is to read it as following: De'u ki Adonai hu Elohim, know that the Lord, Hashem, is our God. Hu asanu, God made us, velo with an aleph, and not we ourselves. God made us, and not we ourselves. Now, here's the thing. Very few people are delusional or crazy enough to say, oh yeah, I made myself. But I think that the idea that animates this verse is, how actively do we keep in our awareness the sense that, oh, the fact that I'm here at all, that's a gift I did nothing to earn. In other words, this is not a question of, in the catalog of your views of the world, would you say that you created yourself? But is your awareness, your day-to-day awareness, such that you act as if you did? That's really the question that a psalm like this is interested in. And perhaps not surprisingly, according to the book of Ezekiel, the Bible's arch-villain, Pharaoh, says about himself, Li ye'ori va'ani asitini, which can be translated in one of two ways. The Nile is mine, and I made it for myself. Or, the Nile is mine, and I created myself. Now, what's important about this is, for the Bible, Pharaoh is the guy who has no sense of moral restraint whatsoever. He can do whatever he wants to whoever he wants. And for the biblical imagination, that somehow stems from this sense of, I really don't owe anyone anything. In fact, I'm the author of my own life. I made myself. And so for the rabbis of the Talmud, what it means to live a spiritual life is to be an anti-Pharaoh. To say, oh, not only am I not the author of my life, the fact that I'm here is a gift that I did nothing to earn. So look very quickly at source number 2. We won't have time to look at all of these sources inside, but I just want you to see this. Commenting on the verse we just read, De'u ki Hashem hu Elohim, know that God, the Lord is God. Rabbi Yehuda bar Simon and Rabbi Acha, these two rabbinic sages. Rabbi Yehuda bar Simon Amar, this rabbinic sage, Rabbi Judah, says, De'u ki Adonai hu Elohim, hu asanu velo anachnu baranu et nafshenu lo kifaro. Right? God made us and not we ourselves. We want to be not like Pharaoh. What that means, right, to be a religious person, to refuse to be like Pharaoh, is to refuse to believe that you created yourself, because if you believe that you created yourself, you will likely also come to believe that you don't owe anybody anything. And in that case, you will have the license, again, to do whatever you want to whoever you want. The idea that we did not earn our lives, I will call simply by the word grace. And for those of you who have studied with me before, you know that one of my central projects is to help American Jews reclaim all kinds of language that we ceded to Christians. And we can talk sometime about why that is. I could go on about this for many hours. I won't right now. But grace is a classical word that most Jews hear and think immediately, I'm sorry, but that sounds like Christianity. That's because they got it from somewhere. Right? And I'll give you one example of this, which we won't look at inside. Maimonides says a totally beautiful thing. This is in source 3 for those of you who I know want to go home late tonight and pore over a medieval philosophical text. Maimonides basically says, look, there's two things that the Torah means by the word chesed. Forget about now whether he's right about biblical Hebrew. That's not really my interest. He says, look, I can owe you something, but give you more than I owe you. Let's say I owe you $2, but I choose to give you $4. Or I can owe you nothing, but I choose to give you something anyway. So crudely again, I owe you $0, and I choose to give you a gift. Maimonides then argues that when the sages attribute grace to God, they mean it in that second sense. God owed us nothing and chose to give us life anyway. That is, none of us ever did anything. None of us ever could have done anything to earn the gifts of life and consciousness. That is not even an argument. It's a kind of logical entailment. Right? If you think you created yourself or that you earned your own life, you're not only mistaken, you're nuts. Right? That's sort of what Maimonides is saying, right? That doesn't actually make any sense. It's an incoherent idea. So the idea, in other words, this is my language, not Maimonides, everything we are and everything we have is a gift. The world is a gift. My life is a gift. My life in the world is a gift within a gift. In other words, it's all grace. And by the way, here's how much Jews have ceded the word grace to Christians. I ask rooms full of educated Jews, people with master's degrees and PhDs and doctors, and I say, define the word grace for me, and they can't do it. They literally don't know what it means. They just know that it sounds Christian. So what does it mean? Right? That which I did not earn or had no right to demand, but received anyway. So, at the risk of completely kind of boulderizing Christian theology, when some Christians talk about salvation by grace, what they mean is, I didn't earn it. It's not salvation by works. It's not because I earned it. It's salvation by grace, because God gives me something I didn't earn. Here's what Maimonides says. Judaism begins with an awareness of creation by grace alone. Judaism begins with an awareness of creation by grace alone. I didn't earn this. I didn't earn any of it. I didn't earn any of it. Now, Maimonides beautifully understands the phrase Olam Chesed Yibaneh to mean the existence of the world simply is a function of grace. Now, I want to underscore something that might make you dizzy for a second, but it's actually not as complicated as I'm going to make it. So I'm going to make it complicated, and then I'll try to speak English, okay? Receiving the gift of life is utterly different from receiving any other gift. And I'll say this in abstract language, what I meant by saying it obscurely, and then I'll say it clearly. In a normal act of gift giving, A gives B a gift X. I see Benny and I hand him a copy of a book as a present, right? Simple. But in life, in the gift of life, there is no B there to receive the gift X until the gift is given. B doesn't receive the gift, B is constituted by the gift. Now, in English, right? I give Benny a book. If I, God, give Benny life, it's a totally different kind of giving than giving him a book. He doesn't even exist until I give him the gift. He is the gift. He doesn't receive the gift. He is the gift. We don't receive a gift of life. In some sense, we are the gift of life. This is not what your mother meant when she thought you were God's gift, but it's a version of it. You are God's gift. In Abraham Joshua Heschel's memorable phrase, I am what is not mine. I am what is not mine. Not I received what is not mine. I am what is not mine. We ourselves are the gift. Or again, to return to more theological language, our very existence is grace. I had the following conversation recently. This is a true story in Chicago. It a little bit broke my heart. I, in passing, in a talk about my book, talked about grace, and a woman came up to me afterwards and said, I'm so angry at my husband right now. And I thought, okay, that wasn't what I was going for, but let's hear it. And she said, when our daughter was born, I wanted to name her Grace, and he said, that sounds too Christian. And I was right. So what I didn't say was, you could have called her Chana, which means grace. From the word chen, right? Hannah means grace. But by the way, she was right. I did not tell her to go home and tell her husband, you see, I was right, and Rabbi Held said so too, because I didn't think that was constructive. Now, but here's the thing. Here's the thing that I want to sort of take us to, which is this is not an abstract idea to hold in the back of our minds, but something, Jewish spirituality argues, that we are meant to hold in our consciousness as frequently as we can. And there is a source that I brought you here that I wanted to show you, source 5. This is a good example, just to speak very candidly. The first time I ever read this midrash, my reaction to it was somewhere between hostility and anger. Because I thought, oh great, just what I need, another text to make me feel bad about myself. And then over time, I've sort of ended up in a relationship of like real gratitude for this text. So I wanted to share it with you for a minute. Source 5. Here's the teaching. Rabbi Levi b'shem Rabbi Chanina Amar. Rabbi Levi said in the name of Rabbi Chanina, Al kol neshima u'neshima she'adam noshem tzarich lekales laborei. For every single breath that a person takes, they must praise the Creator. My ta'ama, what is the reason? What is the textual basis for this? The last verse in Psalms, Kol ha-neshama tehalel Yah, let every soul praise God, is now read, creatively misread, Kol ha-neshima tehalel Yah, let every breath praise God. Why did I hate this text when I first read it? because it was like, oh, not only am I not grateful enough, with every breath I'm not grateful enough. I don't just fail every day, I fail every instant. And then, eventually, it sort of hit me that I could read this text not as a bludgeon, but as an invitation. That is, maybe you feel, okay, life is a gift and I didn't earn it, but I'm really busy. And I'm dealing with worrying about my kid, and dealing with the pain in my hip, and dealing with all the people and the things that drive me crazy, and every pocket on my body is currently beeping. When? How? And this text is perhaps an invitation that says, okay, I have a suggestion. Inhale. Where did that come from? Inhale. Who made that? That is, this becomes a kind of portable piece of theology, that every inhalation becomes an opportunity to remember the gift of grace that life is. That maybe that's what he's offering us. With every breath, there's oh, wow. I don't think I made that. And yet there it is. I don't know that I can fully explain in words what I mean by this, but I'll say it and hope that it's clear. I think that in moments when we take this to heart, the idea of being arrogant or supercilious or condescending actually becomes almost incoherent and impossible. Like a sense of active gratitude, a sense of how much I've received that I didn't make, actually is personality transforming. So that's part one, grace. And just so I'm not misunderstood, I'm not suggesting that this is the only place that a spiritual life can begin. I actually think in Judaism you have this other pole that is really interesting, which is the idea that a spiritual life begins, as the Midrash imagines it did for Abraham, by looking at the world and saying, it's not supposed to be like this. And so that Judaism actually gives us these two really interesting starting points: gratitude for the gift of life and indignation about just how off the world seems to be. The great Catholic writer, not a friend of the Jews, G.K. Chesterton, describes this as storming the castle and making it home. Making it home is breath. Storming it is, it's not supposed to be like this. Okay. Now, grace. Where does all that lead? Obviously, not surprisingly, an awareness of grace leads us to a posture of gratitude. And I want to take a minute just to explain what I mean by a posture of gratitude. I don't think that a spiritual life is based on a feeling of gratitude. And some of you have heard me talk about this in the context of love. I don't think that Judaism is based on the feeling of love. It's based on the posture of love. What is the difference? It's not about whether I have a particular feeling at a particular moment. It's about whether I have a disposition to feel in a particular way. Whether I am prone to feeling a particular way. Why is this important? Because you cannot build a spiritual life on a feeling, because feelings come and go. No one feels anything all the time. Try meditating for 45 seconds. Or the example that I give, I know some of you have heard me, forgive me, the example that I often give that is embarrassing as a statement about my own life, but you wake up in the morning, you take a deep breath, you say, I'm so grateful for the gift of life. Everything is so beautiful. And then 4 minutes later, you're downstairs, your kids are yelling at you, you just burned the oatmeal, and you think, why was I born? And you think, wait a minute, I was filled with gratitude 4 minutes ago, right? And the reason you can't talk about a spiritual life being based on a feeling is that that's what life is like. Maybe not that extremely, but that's what life is like. So the spiritual life is based on a posture, an orientation towards gratitude. That is also really important, because if you tell people that the spiritual life is based on the feeling of gratitude, you invite them to lie to themselves about what they're feeling. Because no one feels that all the time. I remember, this is like sort of a digression, but years ago, I was working on a class. I went to the library and I ordered every self-help book about gratitude that had been published in the last 25 years. I like to say this was the day when my colleagues had a meeting about why I draw salary, right? Like, what do you actually do with your time? But okay, so I go to a table and I spread out like 150 books about gratitude. And because I was once an academic, I can say I didn't read the books, but I read at the books. You know, I like turned pages, I read the beginning, I read the end. And here's the thing, like a third of the book said this completely deranged thing. Here's what they said. They said the goal is to feel grateful all the time. And because I am grumpy in the way that I am, I thought, really? Let's say I'm driving home from my wife's funeral. What if I just found out that I have cancer and won't live to see my child's bar mitzvah? What if the doctor just told me that my kid has a mysterious ailment and they have no idea? What do you mean you're supposed to feel grateful all the time? That's not only false, that's actually dangerous, right? I'm supposed to be oriented to gratitude. That is both much harder and much more accessible because it allows people to feel what they feel. Sometimes what I feel is grumpy. I always like to say, call me on a Tuesday afternoon and ask me whether I am currently feeling love or gratitude, and I can almost promise you the answer is, I am filled with hate of whoever invented email. I'm not feeling particularly grateful right now. But if you ask me if I'm oriented to gratitude, I like to think that the answer is yes. Okay, so we have grace and an orientation to gratitude, which makes it possible to begin to have a religious life. Now, where does gratitude lead? I think that in Jewish thought, gratitude leads to two places. I'm going to mention one and then talk about the other, right? The one is that in a lot of Jewish thought, you have the idea that the basis of following God's commandments is gratitude. God gave us life, took us out of Egypt, and we feel the urge to repay that. Now, that is not described in Jewish sources as a kind of business transaction. Oh, I took you out of Egypt, now you do what I say. You can find sources that sound like that, but that is not the thrust. The thrust is more the experience of gifts upon gifts. Not only did you take us out of Egypt, you also offered us guidance on how to make our way through the world. My very favorite image in Midrash, that maybe I should have brought, is my very favorite image because I just think it shows the sweetness of how the rabbis of the Midrash imagine their relationship with God. The Midrash imagines that God says to the Israelites at Mount Sinai, hey, listen, when you go to a store and you buy something and it becomes yours, you take the item home and the shopkeeper stays in the shop. But what's about to happen is not like that. The Torah is going to become yours, but I'm going to come with it. I think there is something so incredibly beautiful about that idea. There, by the way, the laws are not imagined. You must keep this or else. The laws are opportunities for intimacy. A mitzvah is an opportunity for closeness. But the second understanding of where gratitude leads is the one that I really want to share with you. And that is the idea that gratitude yields, or better, not yields, but is in a sense made out of an urge to pay forward what I have received. Now, we don't have a huge amount of time, so I won't do this now. But here's what I've sometimes done when I have time for a several-hour block with people. I will ask people, close your eyes and remember a moment when either A, you really needed something and just had no sense that you were going to receive it, and certainly had no one who you could demand it from, and there it was. Could be something small, a home-cooked meal, a smile, a hello. Or imagine a situation where you didn't really know you needed anything. And then all of a sudden, someone does an act of kindness for you, and you're like, I didn't realize how much I needed that. Ever had that experience when someone actually says hello to you, and you're like, oh my God, I didn't realize how lonely I was feeling. Thank you, right? One of the things that I've often asked people to do is, so close your eyes and imagine that moment in your life, and tell me what comes up for you, what you feel. And usually, people say all kinds of fascinating things, but usually I hear some version of two things always. One is, in ways that are usually positive but not always, it makes me feel very small. And two is, I want other people to have what I just got. And what I want to suggest is that that second sense of I want other people to have what I just got is totally integral to Jewish spirituality. I just received something. Do you need it? Someone was just loving to me. Are you lonely? Someone just said hello to me. You know, that guy in the corner, no one ever says hello to him. That there's something that happens that is so powerful where gratitude, you discover, not leads to generosity, but is in a sense constituted by generosity. I discovered something years ago that sort of took my breath away. I was reading an article, I do this so you don't have to. I was reading an article in a philosophy journal in which the philosopher makes the following argument. This is actually source 6. I won't read it to you. It's by a British philosopher. You know he's British because he doesn't have a first name. He just has many initials. And he says, there's a difference between being glad that someone did something for you and being grateful. If you give me a gift and I'm like, that's awesome. That's called being glad. But gladness only becomes gratitude, he argues, when I say, you did that for me? That's awesome. Wonder who I could do that for. This is not a Jewish writer. This is not a Christian writer, to the best of my knowledge. He actually defines gratitude as constituted by the urge to keep the flow going. And what you find is that Jewish sources essentially say the same thing. And I want to give you just a couple of examples of this, and then I will stop and we can talk about it a little bit. One is, this is something that I wrote about in my last book, The Heart of Torah. This is a moment when the laws of sacrifice contain just an unbelievable spiritual power. So the law, bear with me for a minute, okay? The Thanksgiving offering is an example of something called Zevach Hashlamim, an offering of fullness, an offering that comes from a place of feeling whole and grateful. In general, sacrifices of this category, I make the sacrifice, and I have 3 days after I put it on the altar to eat it. But the Thanksgiving offering is different. I put it on the altar, I sacrifice it, but anything that is left over the next morning has to be burned and destroyed. So I'm writing this commentary on the Torah, and I'm thinking to myself, why? Right? Why? Why should this break the rules of the category? And then something so powerful occurred to me. If there are leftovers to a Thanksgiving offering, then I haven't actually fully experienced the gratitude. Because a truly grateful heart does not have leftovers. If I was truly grateful, I would invite other people to share the meal with me. Because a grateful heart, by its nature, overflows. If I'm really grateful, I don't go like this. Hoarding is an anti-religious posture. I'm not talking here about a psychiatric disorder. That's a different discussion. But no, really, I'm saying that very consciously, because I think some people have a form of OCD that makes them hoard. That's different. But the impulse, that's mine too, is a deeply anti-religious posture. The posture of, oh, this is mine, do you need it? Is at the very essence of what it means to live a spiritual life. That's the Korban Todah, the Thanksgiving offering that says, oh, I just had the most amazing thing happen. You want to celebrate? Can I offer you something? That's really quite fundamental. Now, because I want to finish, I want to just observe that I think there are two versions of this in Jewish thought. And I think this is kind of Jewish thought in a nutshell, right? There is what I'm going to call the descriptive version of this and the prescriptive version of this. The descriptive version says something like this. You know, if you're truly grateful, then very naturally and organically, you will share with other people. As source 8 talks about, if gratitude is allowed to function healthily, it will be generous. And the second statement is, and if it is not flowing organically, then I remind you that you're also obligated. Right? Ideally, you will not rely on obligation. Ideally, you will rely on an open heart. But not everyone has an open heart all the time. So I remind you that there is a mitzvah, an obligation, that is a kind of fallback option. I think in a lot of interpersonal mitzvot, obligation is a kind of fallback motive. You understand what I mean by that? The ideal motive is, why, according to Jewish law, is the ideal reason why I should visit someone who's sick in the hospital? The answer is not because God told me to. The answer is because you're sick. What do you mean? But if I'm busy feeling selfish or just too tired or put upon, the law says, you also have to. People often misunderstand Jewish law in this way and think, Judaism thinks I should do things always because I have to. No, if you can't get yourself to want to, then you should rely on have to. But, so the idea here is that just allow gratitude, hateva habari, that's the language you find in Musar writing. The healthy nature of gratitude is that it overflows. And I would just suggest, by the way, that one really powerful form of tshuva, of repentance, is to ask ourselves, what gets in the way between feeling grateful and actually allowing that to blossom into generosity? What gets in the way for you? There is an image in Kabbalah that I will close with, because I really do want to leave some time for questions. There's an image in Kabbalah that I really, really love. Rabbi Judah Lowy of Prague, the Maharal, describes how there is, this is not in your source sheet, there is a flow of chesed, a flow of love, of kindness, that flows from God into the world. And the goal is to keep the flow flowing rather than becoming a dam. And the question is, what makes us become dams? And the answer doesn't have to be, the fact that I'm a horrible person. It might be the fact that I'm wounded, the fact that I was deprived as a child. There's a lot of answers to this that don't have to become opportunities for castigating yourself, but they can become opportunities for liberating ourselves for a deeper form of love and generosity. I don't really know a deeper form of repentance than that, right? Asking, what can allow the flow to continue? And I just want to observe that this is deeply to do this in a real way is deeply countercultural. I don't know, this is Canada, which is a much healthier society as far as I can tell, because I've only been here for like 8 hours, but, than the one I come from, which, being healthier than America right now is admittedly a low bar, but, this is a kind of spiritual alternative to a consumerist culture. Consumerist culture wants to acquire things. A spiritual culture wants to share things. It's a very different way of being. So that's what I mean when I talk about grace, gratitude, and generosity, and the idea, the title, The Gifts of God Flow Through You. An awareness of grace elicits generosity, and real generosity, an awareness of grace elicits gratitude, and real gratitude, in some sense, already is generosity. And if it isn't, we have work in front of us how to make it so. Okay, let's take some questions. Thank you.
Question, is that okay? To our friend, Reverend Dr. Jason Biasi from Timothy Eaton Church.
Rabbi Shai, it's great to hear you teach again tonight.
Thank you.
I'm just really moved to hear in your work, you know enough about Christian theology to kind of wade in there and say, okay, this is kind of our stuff, and we want it back.
Right.
You did something strange with it, fine, but we're not going to let us think that it's yours. I just wonder what's possible once we can be in that contested territory of saying, okay, this isn't mine, not yours. This isn't yours, not mine. We can be generous with these ideas. Your discussion of grace, as you know, we Christians tend to talk about grace when we're talking about redemption. And I'm moved to hear you talk about grace with regard to creation. And you know enough about how we make a hash of talking about grace in our own community.
Right.
I just wonder what kind of further good it could do to talk about grace with regard to creation. And I'm especially thinking about kind of the ecological crisis upon us. Yeah.
Right. So thank you, Jason. You just said a lot of different things. So let me start. Really interesting things. Let me start by saying, I think two things happened that are worth just sort of naming and acknowledging. One is that Jews, in very significant numbers across the denominational spectrum, internalized a traditional Christian anti-Jewish idea according to which Christianity was about love and Judaism was about something else, to the point where you can get up in a Jewish audience and say, according to Rabbi Akiva, God loves you, and some people in that room are thinking, is he a Jew for Jesus? That is such a tragedy, and it actually, recently, like in the last few years, I was reading some social scientific literature about African American intellectuals talking about the experience of being a minority culture and coming to see yourself through the eyes of the majority culture. Most North American Jews don't think of themselves as a minority much of the time, but in 2,000 years of living with Christians, that's exactly what happened to Jews. We believed when Christians told a story about us according to which love was theirs. I'll tell you a story that happened to me that sort of points to this. It's not the story that many of you have heard me tell, don't worry, about trying to talk to rabbis about love. I was talking to a group of Protestant high school students. This is 1999. The term Protestant was still meaningful in some sense in America at that point, right? And I said in passing to this group of students, guys, remind me, what does Jesus say is the great command? All the kids raise their hands. I call on one of them and he says, love of God and love of neighbor. And then innocent little Rabbi Shai held says, great, and now remind me, what is Jesus quoting? Not a single hand goes up. Not a single hand goes up, right? The answer is Leviticus and Deuteronomy, right? Vayikra and Dvarim. And I thought to myself, this is amazing. This is how you propagate a story according to which Jesus invented love out of whole cloth. None of you, it's not your fault, your kids, none of you have been taught what wells Jesus drank from. Not a single one of you. And Jews internalize this. My project is not to have Jews take back love from Christians. It's just to have Jews place love where it always was, which was at the heart of Torah. Now, there's another piece of this, and then, Jason, I will actually try to answer your question. There is another piece of this, which is I think there was a certain point in American Jewish history where American Jews who were anxious about assimilating but did not know much about Judaism began to define their Judaism as whatever they imagined Christianity was not. What is an example of this? Generations of afternoon school students have been taught that Judaism has no notion of the afterlife. This is utterly false to any Jewish source ever. You know where it comes from? Because in the not particularly sophisticated understanding of Christianity that American Jews had, Christianity was all about the afterlife. We don't even believe in that. Love in Jewish culture suffered from this double whammy. Christians told us that it wasn't ours, and then Jews, who also were anxious about not being Christians, were like, it's not ours. We're about something else, like law, or whatever it might be, right? So I think there's a whole kind of revolution that has to happen here around reclaiming what I called, in the subtitle of this book, recovering the heart of Jewish life. And I mean heart in both senses of that word. Heart meaning the heart, and heart meaning what's core. Now, I will say something that is When Jews and Christians talk to each other, it is important, it seems to me, that we get to the point of going beyond just getting into a room and being very polite. And that we actually find ways to talk together about things that are hard. One of the things that is very important to me to say to Jews as well as Christians, Judaism is also about love, but there are ways in which Jews and Christians tend to talk about love in different ways. And I'm happy to sometime, Yael, 10 years from now, you can invite me. I'll give a lecture about, do Jews and Christians love in exactly the same way? I think there's a really interesting discussion to be had there. Christians have historically struggled. I've started saying this to Christian audiences and waiting for the tomatoes, but I think actually it's really important to say Christians have tended to be very bad at recognizing that they could have beautiful ideas that are at the heart of Christianity without those ideas being exclusive to Christianity. Christians have had a very hard time with this. If it's ours, it has to be only ours. You only look like you have it. I think that's just a bad way for religions to function. I used to have this with Jews would say to me sometimes, how can you talk about acts of loving kindness being the heart of the Jewish tradition? Other people talk about it too. To which my honest answer is I'm so glad because there are so few Jews and so much suffering. So if Christians and Buddhists talk about compassion, I am so happy to hear that because God knows we need it. Something does not, what I used to say to Jews really is they would say, well, loving kindness is not uniquely Jewish. I would say, yes, and neither is monotheism, right? Muslims are pretty good monotheists. Jews have always been ambivalent about Christian monotheism. That's a fun topic to talk about. You want to talk about fun stuff? That's a fun topic. So I think actually if we could adopt a posture of grace towards each other, that would mean, rather than trying to convert each other and rather than trying to convince each other why the other is wrong, how about this for an idea, radical for the United States at least in the 21st century? How about we try listening to each other and asking each other questions to understand each other? When people say to me, I don't believe in God, my first question is, tell me about that. It's not, let me tell you why you're wrong. I think Jews and Christians could make up, and I don't mean to equate them because to be honest, the history of Jewish Christianity is largely the history of Christianity and its violence towards Jews, not the other way around. But Jews also say not nice things. I don't know if you know this. Some Jews say not so nice things about Christians. When I was a kid in yeshiva, I'm sorry, I wanted to answer questions. Jason asked me a question and I sort of got all worked up. When I was a kid in yeshiva, I had teachers who would say the following thing and it drove me nuts. This is what they would say. Jason, I'm confessing the sins of my yeshiva teachers today. They would say, Christianity, oh, that's easy. All you have to do is say you believe in Jesus and you're good. But Jews have to keep the commandments. And as a little kid, I was like 14 years old, I would say, I understand that Christians said horrible things about Jews that made us look ridiculous for thousands of years. Do we really need to return the favor now? Or as I once said to a 10th grade teacher, yeah, I know, bandaging lepers in Sri Lanka is really easy, but you are careful with how you eat watermelon on Shabbos. I get it, it's much harder. Now that's a deeply offensive thing to say, admittedly. I know it's hard to believe, but I was once young and brash as opposed to old and brash. But the point is, can we find ways to talk to and about each other that are different than that? Can we finally just do that? Can we talk to people in a way that actually honors their humanity and approaches them with curiosity rather than the need to convince people all the time? Not all of us are so good. I mean, I'm not so good at that all the time, Lord knows, but that's at least the aspiration. I don't know if I answered Jason's question, but I had fun. Yeah, please. Oh, sorry, Yael, you're calling on people. Forgive me. That was a very long-winded response.
Thank you. It's always such an honor and pleasure to learn from you, and the best thing is it gets things going in my own kishkas, and so I hope I can articulate this. But I want to suggest that there may be a third way in terms of your notion of the what evolves naturally from a posture of gratitude and these obligations. I think your analysis is fundamentally psychological. It's either it's human nature in an organic, positive way, or plan B, if not, there's a system of rewards and punishments that can enforce it.
I wouldn't say rewards and punishments. I would say obligations.
Well, but the laws essentially, I mean, ultimately laws, they are laws. But and I take the opportunity for mitzvot, and I'll put that on the side. But what I would suggest is there's a third theological option, which to me the greatest text is the Modani, which we say 12 words we say on first consciousness, and it's exactly, it's awareness that we have our soul back. It's understanding that it's an act of compassion by God, i.e. grace. But then how does it end? The last two words are Rabba emunatecha. It's not about my faith, it's about God's faith. And what I'm thinking is God has faith that we will do the right thing out of the natural understanding that we have this gift by grace, and that creates an obligation.
Okay, so thank you. I'm not so convinced that that's a third way as opposed to a kind of enriching of the first way, but fair enough. I do think, by the way, that's one way that Jews and Christians often talk differently. I think this is actually worth drawing out. Jews tend to be much more, the language I use, for whatever it's worth, is possibilistic about human nature than at least Protestants tend to be. Not optimistic. I don't think Jews are optimistic about human nature traditionally. I think Jews are possibilistic. That is to say, is it possible for you to keep the commandments? Yeah. I think in some ways one of the functions of biblical law is to encourage people to consider that we might be capable of a little more than we think we're capable of. I'll give you an example of this. I was not that long ago reading a commentary on Leviticus by a Lutheran Bible scholar who says, commenting on Leviticus 19:18, love your neighbor as yourself, which is amazing to me. This is an academic Bible commentary, not like a Lutheran devotional. But he says, the purpose of this law in Leviticus is to help the ancient Israelites understand just how deeply incapable they were of doing this and throwing themselves upon the divine mercy. As a sort of Bible scholar, I have to say that's like a really poor reading of Leviticus. It's a really interesting articulation of a certain kind of Lutheran piety that I think is worth respecting really seriously. If you've ever been around people, pessimism about human nature is not crazy, right? But I think that the Jewish reading of Leviticus 19:18 is something more like, I know we fail all the time, but I would like to offer that we might be capable of working harder. Now, why am I saying this in response to your question? I end my book, near the end of my book, by quoting a midrash that I had kind of totally forgotten about till I was just about done with the book. Deuteronomy refers to God as El Emunah, a God of faithfulness. And the Midrash decides to deliberately misread El Emunah to mean a God who has faith. And they say, God decided to have faith in the world and go ahead and create it. That's sort of amazing, and that's your reading of Modeh Ani, I think, right? Rabbi Monetecha, great is your faith in us. That we can do the right thing. That we can do. I would never say that Jewish sources say that God thinks we will do the right thing. God says we can do the right thing, right? Which is different, right? Now, by the way, to back us now back up to Jason's comment, so we're about to do something for the high holidays that might, and I'm going to offer an outrageous explanation of a classical Jewish prayer that I think is the simple pshat of this prayer. We are going to say, and many Jews would describe this as the most emotionally resonant line of their annual liturgy. Avinu Malkeinu, Chonenu Va'anenu, Ki Ein Banu Ma'asim. Our Father, our King, show us grace, Chonenu Va'anenu, and answer us, because we got nothing. V'hoshienu, and save us. That prayer is a prayer for salvation by grace alone. The difference is that what we mean by salvation in that prayer tends to be different from what most Christians mean when they talk about salvation. We're talking about both being healed from sin and being saved from the very real this worldly suffering that we encounter. American Jewish piety is very American, and therefore it's of the school that says, if I just set my mind to it, there's nothing I can't do. I can remake myself. Okay, I don't know how many of you have ever tried that. It's not so easy. I don't know. At the risk of oversharing, every year around the 12th of Tishrei, I wake up and I think, oh God, I'm still pretty jealous. And there's something very powerful about standing in prayer and also saying, you know what? I'm not totally sure I can do this all by myself. I need help. American Jews are often very confused. Who am I asking help from? What do I mean by help, right? But like actually just think, I can't do it myself. Right, the Jews who most get this prayer are Jews who have done the 12 steps. Because they've been taught over and over again, I can't do this myself. So the yearning for grace is not just creation by grace alone. It's creation by grace alone and also parts of salvation by grace alone. Say salvation by grace alone in a room full of Jews, and how many people are now wondering if I'm now going to come out as a Jew for Jesus, right? It's a different form of salvation. It's not the same thing, but it's acknowledging that. See, here's what's so interesting about Jewish sources on repentance. Half of them say, I can make myself over. I can create myself and become a new person. That's what Maimonides basically says. And half of them say, no, you can't. And then they say, okay, good luck. Happy New Year. They don't solve this problem. They present it to us. You can do this. Well, actually, you might need some help. This is one of the things I love about Jewish spirituality, for better or for worse. You take two statements that seem to contradict each other, you offer them both to people, and you don't pretend to offer them a neat synthesis. You just say, okay, now make your way through the world with your eyes and your heart wide open. One more question?
Well, maybe I'll take a prerogative and ask the final question to lead to Selichot. And that is, pretty soon, we're going to stand before the open ark over and over and over again in the coming days, and we're going to recite God's attributes, including Chanun, gracious, Verachum, loving. So why do we do that? Are we reminding God of God's loving ways because we need a break? Or are we reminding ourselves, as you say, that we can put our trust in God? What's going on there? What's the drama that we're playing out through that ritual?
You know, it's a really interesting question, because I think that in the Bible, in ways that can be hard to relate to or make sense of in a kind of modern idiom, there are moments when God does seem to need to be reminded. I'll offer, with apologies to anyone who is going to be at Selichot later down the road, because I'm going to say something about this later too. Number one, sorry, let me try to orient here for a second. There is a moment in Jewish spirituality that I think is very, very touching. I stumbled upon this. This is not a source I was familiar with. I was reading a commentary on the Torah by Rabbi Avraham Saba, who lived in the 16th century and was an exile from Spain, from the Inquisition. And he quotes a passage in the Talmud talking about these 13 attributes. He quotes a passage and he says, the Talmud says that if we just pray these lines, God will answer our prayers. And he says, doesn't always work. We really tried. It's kind of an amazing comment in a traditional Jewish rabbi. He's just like, we tried, right? Think about where he is, right? He's just had his whole world turned upside down. And he says, like, it didn't actually work out that way. And then he says something that I've always found so touching, that Rabbi Splansky is not an answer to your question, but a way of sort of maybe holding it up to the light in an interesting way. He says, I think we always misread that rabbinic teaching. The rabbinic teaching says that when the Israelites need salvation or forgiveness, Ya'asu lefanai kaseder hazeh, which is usually be taken to mean they should pray before me these words. But actually, Ya'asu lefanai in Hebrew could mean they should perform before me these ways. He says, we got it wrong. We thought we were just supposed to pray these attributes when actually we were supposed to embody them. And maybe we didn't do that well enough. Now, of course, you might say, wait a minute, isn't that a form of just of self-blame? Maybe they embodied it fine. And I think he might have said, yeah, okay, but I'm trying to offer, like, what do you deal with in a moment of, what do you hold on to in a moment of crisis and brokenness? I could embody divine compassion more deeply. That could be my aspiration. That's not only reminding ourselves that God is forgiving, it's reminding ourselves that if we want to worship a God who's forgiving, we ourselves have to become more forgiving. Right? I sort of love that. That sort of has saved that piece of liturgy for me in like a really powerful way, because I think of it as like offering such an interesting challenge. If you've ever been tempted to walk into shul on Yom Kippur in the following mood, God, I would love to be forgiven for all the things I did wrong. But as for the people who hurt me, I hope you give them what they got coming. Right? There's a way in which that is actually, to go back to use the language of psychology, psychologically impossible. You can't receive what you're not willing to give. If you're not willing to be loving, you can't receive love. Not really. Imagine a moment in your life when like you're so angry and hostile and like a little kid, your child, your grandchild, whatever, crawls into your lap. There's a part of you that can't even receive it. Or if the moment you receive it, you also give it. Right? They go together. And I just find this to be like a very powerful challenge. You can't go to shul and say, God, forgive me all of my failings. And I'm going to leave here with all the grudges I came in with. You can't do that. You can't do that. First of all, you can't do it normatively, because God says it doesn't work that way. But also, you can't do it discriminatively. You can't actually do it. You won't receive the forgiveness that God offers. And that, to me, is like really very powerful. Like the moment of saying, oh boy, it's not about whether God is willing to forgive me. It's actually whether I'm willing to live with an open enough heart to receive forgiveness in the first place. We all know there are times when that's harder. You ever had the experience of someone forgives you, but you still think, you don't really forgive me. Why would you forgive me? Right? So I think there's something there that is really, I don't know. I mean, in a negative way maybe of putting it is it's a goad. Positive way of putting it is a kind of invitation. Open your heart in the fullness of what it would mean to open it, such that you can both give and receive love and forgiveness. Those are big words, right? It's work. You don't just decide, oh, right, and now I forgive everyone, right? It's work. And I think it's important to say, lest spiritual teachings sound naive, it's also often not linear. When I used to be the rabbi of a shul on Yom Kippur, I would often want to say, and I hope you don't all think I'm completely out of my mind for saying this, I would sometimes want to say, maybe like an hour ago you thought you were getting somewhere, and now you think, I'm the same angry, hostile person I always was. They're not mutually exclusive because it's not linear. It's okay. Just like, keep going. Keep going. The door does not open like this. It opens and it closes. It opens and it closes. And hopefully, at the end of the day, it's more open than it was before you started. It's so easy to become discouraged and dissuaded in the process of taking tshuva seriously. It is so easy to become discouraged and dissuaded. And So it's just holding out before ourselves. I am capable of forgiving. I'm capable of receiving forgiveness. I'm capable of my heart being more open than when I came in here. May it be so for all of us. Thank you so much.
Yasher Koach, Rabbi Held. After a year of so much hatred, the likes of which many of us have not experienced in our lifetime, your teaching about love is a great comfort and an important charge for the new year. We know, Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, you shall love the eternal your God with all your heart, soul, mind, might. How so, the rabbis ask? By acting in the world in such a way that causes God to be more loved. This is what we begin to imagine tonight. On this night of Selichot, we begin to ask the questions: who shall I become? What deeds must I pursue? What loving ways must I bring into my practice so that God too will be more loving and more loved? Over the coming days, through prayer and reflection and with God's grace, answers will emerge and direction will come into clearer focus. So I invite you, please, to join us for dessert downstairs, either by way of the elevator or the spiral staircase, followed by Selichot in the main sanctuary at 10 p.m. For those who are joining us from home, I wish I could pass you a cookie, but please just hang tight and join us again at 10 o'clock. The live stream will be open for you. Shavua Tov, L'Shana Tova.